Welcome to the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. I'm Craig Resnik-Hanson, and today I'm joined by co-host of the Italian football podcast, founder of SempreInter, and pre-eminent football journalist Nima Tavallaey. Nima gives us a glimpse into his passion and love for Inter Milan, his football origins, and so much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our chat with the one and only Nima Tavallaey. Hi Nima, how are you doing on this fine spring morning?
How are you, Craig? It's good to be with you. I'm good.
I'm very well, thank you. We're actually having here in the UK the first bit of non-constant rain probably for the last week or so. So we're finally coming out of a very long winter. How's it doing over there in Sweden?
It's very, very cold. It's I can't remember an April that was this cold since I was a child. I'm in Gothenburg right now, but in Stockholm they've got actual snow, which is pretty depressing given that it's May soon. That's not normal. But it's very, very cold. It's spring outside. You look outside the window and you kind of see the sun shining and that, but it's not very warm.
Oh no, nobody knows what to make of the weather anymore. My wife is German, and she told me yesterday that her sister called her and said that it was snowing over there too in southern Germany in almost May.
Oh, Jesus. Jesus.
What the hell? Anyway, so Nima, you have a fascinating, diverse football story, if I don't say so myself, because there's a lot of different countries involved there, and so
Mm.
as we always do with our guests, the number one thing that we're most interested in is, how did your football journey start? How did you fall in love with the game? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'll start with my background. I was born in Iran, in Tehran, in June 1981. We came to Sweden as refugees in 1984. I was 3 years old. It was my grandmother and my mum and me and I. And so to Gothenburg, and that's where I was raised, in Gothenburg. And of course, my football journey, so to speak, began or my interest in football. The first World Cup I remember was '86 Maradona. I was 5 years old, but I was very, very little. So I wouldn't say that I fully understood rather, what exactly was going on. But I do remember Maradona being unbelievable and watching that goal against England, or that game against England. I remember it very, very vividly. However, as for um, my real first World Cup that I count more as my actual the real first World Cup is Italia '90. Um, and that was kind of interesting how that coincided, because in 80 it coincided with 88-89 Inter dei Record, Trapattoni's Inter. That was the first football game first club game, that the Italian club game that I saw on TV, and was like, that's when I fell hard. I remember in '87 when IFK Gothenburg won the UEFA Cup. They showed those games on TV, and I watched it, and of course, supported them. But it was and being from Gothenburg and all of that. So it was. I've always been, I have two clubs I support. I don't support any other clubs. I support two clubs. It's IFK Göteborg, IFK Gothenburg, and Inter. And my love story with IFK began in '87. And my love story with Inter began '88-'89. That game against Napoli, the Lothar Matthäus, that Inter, Trapattoni's Inter, record-breaking Inter, meeting Napoli at the San Siro, winning that game, winning goal by Matthäus 2-1, securing the Scudetto, the Serie A title, against the reigning champions Napoli, against Maradona's Napoli, at a San Siro. That was the thing that caught me about Inter. I had never seen football atmosphere like that. It was just on TV, but I'd never seen anything like it. I watched the game at my aunt's house. My aunt at the time was married to a German man who's sadly no longer with us. And it was, this was the '80s, so he had a, satellite dish, probably illegally hooked up, because I don't think you were allowed to do that, but he didn't care because he needed to watch his football. So so we were watching German TV, broadcasting that game, and I was completely mesmerized by the atmosphere, the fans, and the characters on the pitch. Walter Zenga, Bergomi, Riccardo Ferri, Nicola Berti, Andy Bremer, Lothar Matthäus, but Klinsmann came a year after. Serena, Diaz. I mean, all these guys. They were just, it was the character, the charisma, and all of that together. And then at the end, when Inter won that game and the celebrations, running these what now are iconic images of them running around with the tricolore, with a shield on the pitch, with the flag. I mean, it was just it was unlike anything I had ever seen up until that point in my life, and I fell hard. People like say, love, but I really don't think the word love is misused here, because it was love. I fell in love with Inter then. And then I suffered from that moment on, barring a couple of, UEFA Cup trophies, in 91, 94, 98. It was pretty much been the suffering as an Inter fan, because, for various reasons, Inter were not very successful and not very well run until, of course, from 2006 onwards, when Inter started racking up Scudetti in the aftermath of the Calciopoli match-fixing scandal, which saw Juventus relegated to Serie B. Or as Eric Tohir, the former Inter owner, said it, together with their Juventus were relegated to Serie B together with their reputation. Then of course the treble and all that. And then of course I founded SempreInter in February 2012, first in Swedish, and then of course a few years later in English, because my purpose with doing that was to create a platform for Inter fans who were non-Italian speakers. By then I'd learned Italian, because I studied Italian both in sixth formal college, as you call it in the UK, and also after graduation I went to a private university in Florence to study for 6 months to learn more. And of course every day because of the internet, the introduction of the internet and social media and stuff like that, I used to read Italian newspapers every single day after that. So I founded SempreInter in February 2012, first in Swedish, and then of course we transferred to English, because the goal was to not have to create a platform for Inter fans who are non-Italian speakers, to a platform and a community for Inter fans globally, but also a news outlet that would give them all the information told in a professional way, in a correct journalistic way, to Inter fans all over the world, which I didn't have growing up. I remember saving my weekly allowance, and when I was a kid, and I used to go and buy day-old Gazzetta dello Sport from the newsstand, and used to look at the pictures and dream that one day I would be able to learn Italian, one day I'd be able to visit San Siro, and watching those iconic players, Bergomi, Ferri, etc., and one day, and little did I know that one day I would not only be able to do that, but I'd turn it into a living, and I'd be covering Inter, and I'd be interviewing many of those people. So it is fascinating. When I think about it, I do get a bit, but I don't think about these things too much, because I'm too busy just working. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you're working with it, you're just focused on doing a good job and being professional. But of course, when I think about it and reflect every now and again, it's cool.
Well, back in those days when you would have been fantasizing about getting to the San Siro and watching games, I bet you had, I wonder if you did maybe have the idea of, being in the stands among the atmosphere with the fans and watching along.
Oh,
do you get the chance to do that much nowadays, or is it mostly from the press box?
I do it both.
Which do you prefer?
Depends, isn't it? Because on the one hand, just going to a game, and like I did last February with some mates from uni, because I went to university in Wales, and Aberystwyth, and got to know friends for life there, and they're all English, and one of them is was a West Ham fan, and he took me to Upton Park because I wanted to go there um, before they left Upton Park or the Berlin. Because that was the real West Ham. I mean, it's an iconic club, and so we went there, and then I said, okay, well, I'm going to take you to San Siro before they tear that down. And so we finally got to doing after pandemics and all that. And, he got married and all that stuff that's happened since we graduated. So we finally got to do that in February, and we had a lovely 4 or 5 days in Milan, and we so that was wonderful because it was their first time at the San Siro. It was their first Milan derby, and so on and so forth. So that was brilliant. Um, but at the same time, I can't help but, when you're working with it, you also think, well, I can, because it's like two sides inside me at the same time, if that makes sense. Because on the one hand, I love just standing there watching the game, not having to focus and concentrate on anything else other than watch the game. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, actually, this can, it's there's also this kind of thing with work where you're like, well, I want to do this, and you think of this angle, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very, I can't choose between them, but it's more relaxing to be a fan than it is to work with it for sure.
And what would you mention that the really long history that you've got with the club and all the different eras that you've seen it go through? Would you say that the club is enjoying one of its better periods right now under Inzaghi, or does it still pale in comparison to some of those decades of the past that you've seen?
I'd say we're in the middle of a winning cycle, which Suning created. I mean, it's been some really turbulent years. Uh, the pandemic and the financial meltdown that caused, especially in Italian football. I mean, it really there was a Inter were in trouble, but they handled it absolutely brilliantly. They handled it by taking 2 steps back and 3 steps forward, and now Inter are in a fantastic position financially, and also the technical project, as term they use in Italy, the football project, is looking better than it's done since Mourinho was there, if we're perfectly honest, because you've got a coach who, unlike Mourinho and unlike Conte, actually wants to stay there. He's happy where he is. He plays a football who the players love. It's a very modern, progressive football. It's a very difficult brand of football, technically and tactically very demanding, but he's made it work, and he's made it work under severe financial restrictions. Um, his first summer, they turned a net profit from the transfer window of 140 million euros. The second season, they turned a net profit of 60 million euros. And last summer, the first summer where he didn't have to turn a profit, they still turned a profit, but it wasn't by a lot. He finally got to keep what he wanted to keep, and he got to strengthen the first team. They made mistakes in terms of rotation players. But now, these 3 years, you're looking at 6 trophies. In the middle of all that, you've got one Serie A title, 3 Supercoppa, 2 Coppa Italias, and a Champions League final on top of that. Now, when you're going through financial purgatory, the way that Inter have done, usually success is not what is expected from you. That kind of success, at least, is not very common, but it has been made common because of the fantastic leadership of Beppe Marotta and the directors at the club, but also Simone Inzaghi, who, it's very obvious where he has learnt his coaching and his man management skills. It is completely reminiscent of Sven-Goran Eriksson for me. Sven-Goran Eriksson is someone who he knew, and that's what he did with IFK Gothenburg in 82 when they won the treble. They won the UEFA Cup, Swedish League. Was exactly that. Building a team, building a unit, but doing it with respect, not by humiliating the football players, not by yelling at them, not by being a drill sergeant like Conte was or is, but by being more a human person. And that's something that Inter's players in interviews have all kind of touched on, saying, well, Inzaghi sees the person. That's all Sven. He learnt that from Sven-Goran Eriksson. That was his leadership style. And I think that is to me the most impressive thing, this notion of leadership by consent as opposed to leadership by management by fear, and which is more stable. Well, management by consent is more difficult to attain, but it's far more stable than management by fear, which you can achieve quicker, but is not as stable because people don't like being treated like plebs and idiots and being yelled at and humiliated. Um,
Yeah, I
and
think
that is
that's why
something.
managers like Conte and Mourinho always have a good couple of years and then it drops off, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that is part of it. Discipline, you can still have discipline, you can still have organization, you can still have all of those things. But if you need to also have some sort of a basic human level of respect, Inzaghi has that in a modern form. And that's all from Sven-Göran Eriksson, who is someone who, well, he is a hero in Sweden, but particularly in Gothenburg.
Well, we've touched on Inzaghi there and the impact he's had. I mean, I heard the other day that he that the club underwent, as you mentioned, a net profit in the transfer market, which was equal to the net loss that they made under Conte. So he's literally reversed the financial situation from a huge loss to a huge profit while, achieving arguably more, if not at least the same success. But how do you see things progressing under Inzaghi next season? I mean, have they reached a ceiling or what's the next goal, do you think, for the club?
Um, Sporting wise, I think it's obvious without them saying it, and they are far too smart to say than to say something like that. But I think it's fairly obvious that they want to win the Champions League. I think the fact that they got to the final and that they were that close as they were in that final, and then since then have improved, and losing on penalties to Atletico the way they did, I think very, very clear on what the problem is and why they didn't succeed. And they think that, well, we look at the key players in the squad, they're all in a perfect age. None of them is that old. In fact, most of them are hitting their peak. What we need is depth. And they kind of addressed that, or are addressing that in the summer, and they've all kind of confirmed it since. Ausilio, the sporting director, Marotta, the sporting CEO, Zhang, the owner, the president, they've all said it that it's not going to be a revolution, but we're going to tweak. We're going to, find specific areas where we can strengthen and where we're going to strengthen. They believe in the group, they believe in the coach, they believe in their project, and there's going to be tweaks needed to be made. There's going to be, because I mean, when Simone Inzaghi was appointed, he wasn't a finished coach. He's still learning on the job. He's 47, 48 years old, despite having coached Serie A clubs for 8.5 years, 5.5 at Lazio, and now 3 years at Inter. So he is still learning on the job, but that's exactly it. They all the feeling you get is that they're all learning together, they're improving together, they're growing together. Um, and that's why it's become a very, very good environment for players to improve. And a lot of people say, well, how is it possible that Inter get these players? Like, they find this right mix of free transfers, old and young, and they get the most out of them. And everyone wants to succeed. Well, it's about creating an environment where people want to get there. Where you can express yourself at the in the best way possible. That's what they've created, which I think is fantastic. It's a fantastic thing that Marotta, Inzaghi, Ausilio, the technical staff, the directors all have done together, and that's a unique thing that they've done. The way they handle crises, the way they approach everything on and off the pitch, with seriousness, respect for one another, and building a group and a unit. And the dynamic surrounding that. It's very impressive. It's very, very impressive. But of course, Simone Inzaghi for me is the key there. I mean, I back in 2017, after having watched him for about 2 seasons at Lazio, I penned a column in the now defunct Calciomercato's English page named "Why Simone Inzaghi is the next Italian supercoach after Antonio Conte and Max Allegri." And I think since then I was hoping that he would come to Inter because of his ability to develop young players. I mean, so many young players that have exploded under him, such as Sergej Milinkovic-Savic being a fantastic example of that, um, and also Di Marco and many others. But also his ability to get out of players who are older, maybe, and have somehow never really peaked. Perisic was never better under Inzaghi than under Inzaghi. Çalhanoğlu turned into a world-class midfielder under Inzaghi. Lautaro Martinez has become a goal scorer who's yet to fully peak under Inzaghi. Marcus Thuram has never played this well until he played under, Simone Inzaghi, and so on. I can, countless others. That is what's unique about him. That he did the same thing at Lazio. Ciro Immobile became the European Golden Shoe winner under Inzaghi. He was never that prolific until he worked with Simone Inzaghi. His way of viewing football and his way of creating a system where you get the best out of all the players that are available to you, and building a group is truly unique. And I think he is the embodiment of the modern coach, what a modern coach needs to be. I honestly think that Mourinho's downfall is in large part due to his inability to communicate properly with the generation that came after the John Terrys, the Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the Michael Essiens, the Didier Drogbas. The Paul Pogba generation and younger, he just doesn't know how to communicate with them. And we already saw signs of this when he was at Inter, the problems he had with Mario Balotelli. They just did not understand each other. And Mourinho, I remember vividly saying at the time, I've tried everything. I've tried being angry. I've tried being kind. I've tried being understanding. I cannot reach him. And I think when you in communication, when you have a group of people, regardless of football or whatever context it is, communication is key. If the people involved can't communicate, things will never work. And I don't think he can. I think his biggest problem is that he can't communicate with this new generation. Whilst Inzaghi has a fantastic ability to communicate with everyone, and to build a relationship and make everyone feel involved, the same way Mourinho did, but with the older generation. Because I think it's it can't be underestimated and understated how, generations differ, people differ, and communication changes through the ages. And some generations don't they don't respond to how previous generations have responded to being communicated with. And I think, Inzaghi is a modern guy in that sense, and also that he was he was a footballer himself. He was a striker for Lazio, played for the national team, played I think 20 minutes with his more famous brother Filippo Inzaghi for the Italian national team. So yeah, no, I really think he's the key, and he's also a kind of person who doesn't change the tone of his voice when he wins or loses. He's not that guy. And Sven is again exactly like that. His tone of voice doesn't change whether he's winning or losing. What you see is what you get. It's a very humble, down to earth approach. And I think people respect that. I think people respond to that. And I think that's how he's managed to, despite last season, 12 defeats in the Serie A and people yelling at him and demanding that he resign and insulting him. He didn't say anything. He was quiet. And I remember the game against Spezia away when Inter lost. They were all standing there listening to the fans and the ultras yell at them, and it didn't look very good. But he demanded that the players stand there and take responsibility and listen to the fans. Don't argue, applaud them, respect them, listen to them, but of course, know your role. Their roles are to be fans. Your role is to be a player. So, and you have to act accordingly. Everyone has to know their roles and respect them. And I think people respond to that, Craig. I think people respect that. And because when he, a few months later, went to the final of the Champions League, beating Milan in the semi-finals, he was still the humble person. He was still the same person. He didn't change. And I think people respect that deeper than they do if someone is a bit more like Mourinho and Conte, who are, very superstar, Hollywood, larger than life, flamboyant characters who the media loves. But I think when you're building a relationship with people, I think the Inzaghi approach is more, it stands the test of time and it's more durable.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. I think it's like we said before. I think that those sort of more bombastic coaches, they tend to have a shorter cycle, and it tends to blow up a little bit quicker. Not always, but a lot of the time. But I just want to take a quick detour from Inter because as a an Iranian-born Swede who is
Mm.
obsessed with Italian football, where do your allegiances lie when it comes to the international game, when it comes time for the
Mm.
World Cup?
It's primarily Iran and then secondarily in Italy.
Ah, that's interesting.
That's mm. Italy, as I said, my first World Cup that I consider to be my really first World Cup is Italia 90. I mean, those images of a packed Stadio Olimpico, the opening games against Czechoslovakia, the United States, Austria, it was, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it was, again, it was exactly like watching Inter a year earlier. I've never seen anything like it. It spoke to me in a way that was, it just knocked me out. It was love. Again, love. It was literally was love. I fell in love with Italian football the same way I fell in love with Inter. And that's why when I love Inter, but when I cover Italian football, when I find these fascinating stories of Pantaleo Corvino from Lecce being the sporting director at Lecce, building what he's done there is to me a fascinating story. Same thing, Pier Paolo Marino, who was one of the greatest sporting directors ever, and his journey with Napoli through the ages, and potentially now rumors saying he might return there. We don't know if that's true or not, but if he were, it's an unbelievable story. Um, the stories of in Sicily, Catania, the Catania under Pulvirenti and Lo Monaco, when they came up to the Serie A, Zamparini and Palermo, there's so many stories. Sean Soliano, another sporting director, who's working wonders. I mean, who has worked wonders and is still doing so. It's Hellas. I mean, it's just, you can go on forever with talking about, these characters, these stories. Um, that's what that's the aspect. Those are the aspects of Italian football that I'm absolutely head over heels in love with. You know, because Italy's only been a country for about 160 years. Every region is essentially its own kind of country with its own kind of history and pride and dialects of Italian, which are almost their own languages. And you have to kind of, in order to understand that, you have to kind of know and put yourself, in my opinion at least, you have to kind of go into it. You have to really dedicate yourself to understanding the history, the culture, the regional differences. And that expresses those regional differences express themselves in food, in history, in music, in literature, in art, in architecture, and in football. And that is what I am in love with. And that all started in Rome in the summer of 1990.
Last one, Nima, and it's a hard one. Well, it could. Some people find it hard, some people find it easy. But what has been your favorite moment watching Inter?
Um, Look, nothing can beat the unrivaled, unbridled joy and euphoria of the Champions League semi-final um, in 2010 against Barcelona, with everything that entailed. It was the culmination of Interismo, that game. Everything that is Inter, the old Inter, not because this is a new Inter, but the Inter that I grew up with, the contro tutto e tutti, us against everything and everyone trying to stop us, from the Italian establishment, the European establishment, this kind of everyone against us. Everyone wanted Barcelona to win. Everyone wanted Inter to fail. That was kind of, it just manifested itself in Mourinho, and he was so smart that he knew how to channel that onto the pitch, with Ibrahimovic expressly leaving Inter in the summer preceding that to win the Champions League, to go to Barcelona, and for Inter to do what they did at the San Siro and then go to Camp Nou, get a player sent off for, Busquets pretending to get hit in the face. There was no VAR at the time. And, all of that, and to lose but win. Inter won the treble then and there. That feeling will never be rivaled. Equally, the most emotional experience I've had at San Siro was last April, May, when I was there at the return leg in the semi-final of the Champions League against Milan, where Inter was, Simone Inzaghi's Inter leveled the score with Milan, in the sense that a part of leveling the score with Milan, Inter having lost 2 Euro derbies, as they call it in Italy, the derbies in the Champions League, to Milan. But this time around, there was no doubt Inter won that, and they won it without conceding a goal, and gave them payback, essentially. And standing there at the final whistle, the atmosphere, I've been lucky enough to be there and watch, I think, 10 derbies or something like that. But I've never experienced anything like that, the atmosphere there, the Euro derby, that return leg. It was, I can't, words fail me. And the final whistle, when Lautaro scores that goal, the final whistle, and the incredible release of emotions afterwards, there's nothing like it. I really can't express that. Those 2 moments are, for me, even though they weren't finals, those 2 moments really stand out in my mind.
Nima, I can feel, and I'm sure the listeners will, the passion like dripping from my earbuds right now. I feel like it's rare that we have a guest so passionate about their club, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Whenever you want, Craig. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks so much, Nima. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sporticos Football Stories podcast. It was an absolute pleasure talking to Nima, and we can't wait to bring you more chats with fans from across the footballing landscape, from ex-pros to bloggers, YouTubers, journalists, and much more. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing. If you really liked it, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your pods. That will help us out so much. Thanks again, and catch you next time on the Sporticos Football Stories podcast.